firstly, let me say that fantasy is not the only genre of fiction that I like, and I also like a good deal of nonfiction. I'm a history teacher, so biographies and books on history I enjoy. Action adventure, not straight up horror, but Dean Koontz kind of mystery, suspense books I like. I tell my students all the time that I'm a closet nerd. I especially like saying it to my wrestlers. I'm a wrestling coach also, because they're fairly aggressive athletes. They're pretty strong. They're in really good shape, and when we lift, I oftentimes will go lift with them, and I'm a pretty strong guy, so I lift a lot of weight. So when they find out that I'm into fantasy and Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that, so they get pretty surprised. So yeah, I'm a closet nerd. Now, just because I like fantasy, does that mean I'm a nerd? I would say no. Plenty of people that like fantasy that may not fit that particular mold. Well, firstly, I grew up in a household that was into fantasy. I loved Robin Hood and King Arthur. I remember watching movies and cartoons about Robin Hood and King Arthur from a very young age. I remember my dad reading Terry Brooks and David Eddings. My uncle played Dungeons and Dragons, and so I got into Dungeons and Dragons also. I watched the old Hobbit cartoon. Some people might remember that. I watched that all the time. Movies like Dragon Slayer and Excalibur. I probably watched Star Wars, the original Star Wars movies, every day of my childhood. And I know that they're technically sci-fi, but to me they're still kind of the same kind of imagination. We watched Star Trek as a family, and yes, you can like both Star Trek and Star Wars. I read Lord of the Rings as a kid, A Wrinkle in Time. That was one that my mom and I read together. The Wizard of Earthsea, a lot of Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms books. So I was kind of set up for fantasy. But there were other things that appealed to me as well. I spent a lot of time outside, outdoors as a kid, hiking and playing. And there just seemed to be all these mysteries around me. There's this meadow on Mount Lemmon, which is a mountain just north of Tucson in the Catalina Mountains, that is all green, and it's shrouded with these tall pine trees and all these yellow and blue flowers and red flowers all over the place. And we would go up there, and I would just think to myself, elves live here. There's no doubt in my mind that elves live here, or fairies. Elves or fairies. And I would walk around looking for them. Or we would be hiking and find this cave that was clearly an entrance to a dwarvish kingdom. Or if it was a menacing looking cave, that's where goblins lived, and of course I would typically freak myself out. I just saw all these mysteries around me, and it made magic make sense. Dinosaur bones could have been dragons long gone. Heroes and villains, this eternal struggle between good and evil. One that wasn't just physical, but it was a supernatural struggle. All these things kind of appealed to me, and then the fact that you could have this world separate from ours, or maybe it's our world, but seen from a different point of view, a different standpoint, that kind of appealed to me too. These stories of an alternate dimension or universe attached to our world. To be honest and not get too religious, these mysteries that I experienced in nature, changes in the weather, monsoon storm in Arizona, just everything around me are some of the same things that solidified my faith in God as well. God is supernatural. He transcends anything that we can comprehend, and definitely not trying to equate God to a fantasy story or elves or dragons, but he can seem fantastical. A Bible story can seem like a fantasy story. Again, I'm not trying to make the two things equal, because they're not. But it was just kind of the way that I looked at things. So when you add in actually writing fantasy, creating new worlds, creating people and languages and creatures, that idea of wanting to create a story for other people to enjoy, that idea of getting someone else to dive into my imagination really becomes real. People can pick up one of my stories and be completely transported for at least a little time to another place that only exists in my head. And that to me is the true essence of art, and very cool. And so, when it comes to fantasy, I think that's one of the biggest things that appeals to me. Again, I like action, I like adventure, I like mystery, I like suspense, but in many ways, a lot of those stories, you can pick up and read about them in the newspaper, or you can turn on the news and you can see those stories. And, fantasy you can't, even if it's a kind of like urban fantasy, like Harry Potter or something like that. It's something that only the person who created that story can dream up, and they, in a way, give you, the reader, me, the reader, the ability to transport into their head for just a little while. And it gives me goosebumps thinking about it. It's just very, very cool. So I think that's what appeals to me the most about fantasy.